So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So let's start with just a basic explanation. So hi, I'm Bubby. I'm pretty much the main developer behind the creation tools here. And this is my passion. This is my thing, is UGC. So if you have any questions, forward them to me after the stream or during the Q&A. So my background is from Rec Room and a little in VR chat, but not so much. I've never done any actual creation there. But one of my favorite parts about Rec Room is the ability to just create things while you're playing the game at runtime. And that's really stuck with me, so I wanted to make something similar, but I noticed some things that I really wanted that just weren't possible with their implementation of things. So that's why I've created, well, originally CVR, and now the creation tools. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So just a quick explanation, right? Our first topic is going to be, well, what makes this different? What makes it different from just basic shapes, right? CVR creation tools aren't made out of primitives. They are made out of what are called game objects, which are the same as objects in Unity. That means you are directly interfacing with the engine itself. But everything is working at runtime. That means there's no editor, nothing on PC. Everything here is 100% functional, even on standalone like Quest 1 and Quest 2. That is a guarantee. So, what makes that difficult? Well, in Unity, you can say just import a material, import a texture, whatever you want. You're making a game. In CVR, it's different because things are A, networked, and B, it all has to be done without accessing, say, things like assets, where you have to import and synchronize that. So we have to make our own pipeline for importing things like assets. For example, at a certain point, we are going to work on a custom texture system, and when we do that, we have to make sure that they're on our servers, not on the local machine, because it's just not possible to synchronize those between machines effectively. Let's go with the most basic possible object you can create in CVR. This is just a basic mesh. We'll get to that term in a moment. And it's a plane, or a quad. So as you can see, you should be able to see, I believe, a face is this flat part right here. So, it's the part with the checkerboard on it. In Rec Room, I'm going to use this example a lot, is Rec Room. In Rec Room, when you create an object like this, you could do this, right? It would be a cube, and you just scale it down to be minuscule, just absolutely as tiny as possible. But you're never going to get this level of simplicity. It's always going to have extra geometry that isn't really necessary. But what we can do with this is what really sets us apart from other creation systems is what I'm about to do. I'll use a cube, for example. So you can see this cube, right? If I were to select one of these control points, a control point is also known as a vertex. You may know that in game development or modeling. Each of these little corners is called a vertex. Those vertices are then linked into faces, which are, again, the flat parts. And what we can do is, in most games, you would modify this just by scaling it, right? What we can do is move individual vertices. As you can see, this, again, I'll use the example of Rec Room. In Rec Room, this would be at least 2 shapes, if not more. In CVR, this is just 1 shape. If I were to move this vertex down, that's even more complexity, but it's all still the same shape. What I can also do, this is another major feature that you won't really see all that often, is axis-independent scaling. In games like Rec Room, the scaling is linked. That's what we use the term for. I don't know the actual term. The scaling is linked, as in, when you scale on one axis, you are forced by the engine to scale on every other axis uniformly. You can't stretch things. In CVR, if I want to, I can just do that, and it just works. It's known as axis independent because each axis is independent of all the others. That's one of the nice things is, if I were to spawn, say, what I can also do is spawn a couch from the lounge. If I want this to be longer, so this allows for a lot more diversity in what you can make, because, see, I can just make this longer, and it works. If I want this to be fatter, I just squish it down. It's that simple. Now, a more complex example of this is with another shape I'll use, the torus. Now, Nexus isn't here, but I know if he were here, he'd be cheering right now, because this is a primitive that was his profile picture at one point. So, what I can do with axis-independent scaling is I can just make this longer, and it just works. If I want this to be, say, a disk, like a CD, I can just make it into a CD. I can delete it now. And what really, really excites me about this system is truly accurate colliders. Now, you have worked with tools in Rec Room for almost any period of time. You will know about the woes of Rec Room colliders. I'll use the torus again as an example. If I spawn this in Rec Room, and I land on it, it works, right? But what happens if I want to go through the center? Do you know what happens? In Rec Room, for performance reasons, I use box. It's just a box collider. In CVR, but I can just go through. It's a collider. It's 100% physically accurate to exactly what you see. So, what else can we do with this? Let's say, for example, I'll use a cube. Now, if I edit this, in Rec Room, this is as low as you can go. This is the simplest thing you can make in Rec Room. It's a cube. If I want to get any more complexity than this, I need to use multiple shapes if I'm in Rec Room. In CVR, if I want to, say, add a ramp to the side of this, let's say this is a building, all I have to do is extrude. And there we go. Now, you may notice this is a triangle. That's because faces, currently, we are actually converting this, are triangles. So each quad you see here is actually split in two into two triangles. In the future, and actually on some models right now, that does not apply. These will just be singular faces. That's just something to consider. This, again, is physically accurate. I can walk up and down it perfectly fine. What else can we do with this?
If you guys want
Have you ever had... You may remember a few months ago in Rec Room, there was a exploit that allowed you to make inverted cubes. Now that exploit was extremely useful, except you couldn't make colliders with it, because again, tubes were just made out of sphere colliders. If I spawn a cube, and scale it up, let's say I want to make a room, right? I want to make a room in the shape of a cube. In Rec Room, you would need 6 cubes just for a basic hollow cube. But in CVR, if I go into face mode, and I do this, as you can see, this cube, you should be able to see, at least, this cube is inverted. Just like that, we've made a room, without any extra effort than flipping those vertices. Those faces, I'm sorry. In Rec Room, this would have taken significantly longer because you need to clone and recreate every single side of this room. And it's see-through from the outside because these normals, or these faces, only render from the front. That saves on performance because we don't need to render every single face of every single side of the cube. In CVR, I developed personally, let's say I want 2 objects to be linked. Seems like a simple task, right? In Rec Room, you would need a completely separate third object for this. You would need what's called a clamp. What I can do here, let's say I want it to be so that way when I move this sphere, I want this cube to move alongside it. Right now it doesn't do that. I go to what's called the hierarchy menu, which is a direct representation of the actual Unity hierarchy, again interfacing directly with the engine. I can click the Set Parent button, and I click on the cube. Now if I move the cube, the sphere moves alongside it. I could invert this, I could switch it so that way the sphere is the child of the cube. Now, if you're familiar with the Rec Room creation tools, you'll know that to have a different material, a part of an object, it has to be 100% separate. So, if I want a cube to have a different material, I need to make a separate cube to have a different material. Boom. It's that simple. Purple grass on one face. It's that simple. There's nothing more to it.
Why is grass purple? Because funny colors.
let's say I want to change the color of this grass, right? That seems like a really simple task. In games like Rec Room, you're limited to simply a palette. There are preset colors that you are limited to, and you have to use those colors. There's no other way. In CVR,
Sorry,
let's say I want to change this
editing.
grass to be green. I can directly adjust the RGB values. As you can see, I can change the texture, like so, and I can change the color. Alright, there we go. So you can make this any color you want within the RGB spectrum. It's that simple. You just change 3 sliders. Now, let's say I want glass. This is actually part of the reason for CVR existing, but that's a story for later. Is we want a transparent material on this, right? Should be pretty simple, right? We just want glass. So, in CVR, we just switch the shader to transparent and turn down the alpha. That is the opacity, or opacity as it were, of this. Okay, Leon, you're gonna need to change that again, because for some reason
Custom material 1?
Yeah, custom material 1, turn the alpha to about 50%. I'm having some issues on my end right now. That's probably because I'm working in the editor, not in a build. But for the record, this does all work the same in a build. And as you can see, we have glass, just like that.
Yeah.
Now, this is real. And as you can see, this is a perfect example of how the back faces, the faces behind this, aren't rendered. These faces, I can see them right here, because they're facing me. But they're not facing you, so you can't see them. Let's say I want to fix that. Just like with getting the room to face the right way, it's just a matter of flipping the normals. And see, just like that, it displays. So this is a really powerful feature, is the ability to just change colors on the fly, 100% accurate, and that combined with the ability to directly modify the object, which also modifies the colliders, just provides a huge amount of flexibility. Let's say you don't want to use our tools. Let's say you want to make a room, and you want to import something that's really complicated. And so you don't want to have to model it by hand because it will take hours and hours and hours. So what I can do, if you give me a moment to type this out, is I can use a special tool in our palette menu, under the Actions menu, and I can do something that is unprecedented in games other than I think Neos has this. And that is, I can import an OBJ file. There we go. I'd like you to say hello to our friend Suzanne. This is Suzanne. She's a monkey, and she was made in Blender, 100% just by spawning a primitive in Blender. I then exported her as an OBJ file, and now I have imported her successfully into CVR. If I want, I can scale this model independently on any axis. If I want to stretch, if I want to squish, anything I want to do, I can now modify this mesh 100%. This is, especially the mesh editing system, is entirely 100% unprecedented in the VR and in multiplayer. It hasn't been done. This is a completely new system. And
the closest system is actually Neos VR, in fact.
Yeah, and even Neos, as far as I'm aware, doesn't actually have a mesh editor yet. It's only importing models, which is fine. But if you're on Quest, a standalone platform, or if you just have a computer or you don't have Blender, then what do? You have to make it with primitives. In CVR, you just make it the same as you would in Blender. Obviously, we don't have the toolset of Blender yet, but the point is still very powerful compared to something where you're building it out of cubes and spheres. That, combined with the ability to use colliders, just completely physically accurate, is probably one of the defining things about this creation system. So on that note, we're going to be accepting questions now.